Morning, welcome to the Be Better Off Show.
The Be Better Off Show.
I always say, have a great day.
Well, good morning, everybody. I must say I wasn't born the Imelda Roche. I'm a very ordinary girl and came from a very modest background. I'm the second eldest of 6 children, born to a family where my father aspired to be something of an academic and a journalist, and he was much more impressed with his writing than most of the editors around town. So he was not much of a dependable provider. His provision for the family was very spasmodic. So my mother had to really take on the primary carer role, and she went to work in the glassworks when I was about 7 years old, and would leave home at 6 in the morning to start work in the glassworks and then finish at 3:30 and then work as a barmaid during those years of 6 o'clock closing, and was never home until 7 o'clock at night. So my elder sister and I kind of cared for the 4 younger children until she arrived home. So I learned very early in life that it's very important for women to learn a skill to be able to provide financially for themselves in something they enjoyed doing. Because I would be absolutely certain my mother did not enjoy working in the glassworks, nor would she have enjoyed being a barmaid during those years of the 6 o'clock swill. So it had a very profound impression on me in my early life. And of course, it was mentioned that my grandmother was probably my primary mentor. She was a mother of 7 children. And my grandfather spent his life as a seaman a marine engineer in the South China Sea. So he was rarely ever at home, and she raised her family mainly single-handed. But of course, he was there often enough to impregnate her 7 times. So I watched these women, my mother and my grandmother, who were remarkably strong women and raised families that have gone on to be very fine citizens. And I count myself in many ways among that, because I have focused through most of my business life in making it possible for other people to succeed, and primarily women. I was very focused on providing women with a pathway and an avenue where they could be financially self-reliant and did not have to rely on another human being, nor social service, nor anything else to provide for them and their families. And I heard a saying when I was a very young woman, that poverty, thy face is woman. And I thought about that quite a lot because it is so very true. You know, most of the poverty in this world is dealt with by women for themselves and for their children. So that was really the catalyst, I suppose, that took me into the industry that I spent my life building a business which eventually expanded from Australia into 21 countries. We established corporate headquarters in 16 and traded in 21. So I worked with many thousands of women around the world. But the things that guided me to some degree were encapsulated very clearly, and it was to build and provide an environment in which women could succeed. Because if women succeed, their families succeed. There is no doubt that the caring that basically holds a family together is the caring that's injected into any family unit by the woman, by the mother, by the homemaker. You've all heard that wonderful old saying, happy wife, happy life. Now, there's very few of you guys who could achieve a very happy life without a happy wife, if you happen to have one. I should ask you, how many of you read the article by Matt Wade in last Sunday's Sun Herald? It was called Jobs for the Future. Did anybody in this room read that article? Well, let me share some of the statistics that he shared in that article. He talked about a group of experts charged by the New South Wales government to investigate the future of work and he predicted a dwindling share of physical jobs. The article identified that there has been a tectonic shift in the labour market. About 80% of all jobs created in New South Wales during the past 20 years have been knowledge-intensive ones. The overall share of knowledge-intensive jobs has climbed from 37% to 48%, and the proportion of knowledge-intensive jobs is set to reach 61% by 2036. Meanwhile, the share of physical jobs is tipped to fall to 21%, and the share of routine jobs is forecast to shrink to only 17% by 2036. He went on to say, however, there's another trend that means that education and technical skills alone may not be enough to assure future success. Research by Harvard University economist David Deming shows the jobs market is rewarding social skills. Now, Wayne talked briefly about social skills this morning. Not just knowledge. His study of the US labour market found employment and wage growth has been strongest in jobs that require high levels of both cognitive skills and social skills. Being able to get on with others and communicate clearly will be more important than ever before. Another skill, often used in conjunction with advanced social skills, and one that I use very frequently, is emotional intelligence. And of course, we all know about intelligence per se, as opposed to emotional intelligence. That's the ability, as Wayne has talked about this morning, to be able to connect and communicate with other human beings. One of the greatest skills we can ever achieve in life, irrespective of skills and knowledge, is the ability to communicate effectively with other people. The ability to be persuasive, to be able to share ideals and to be able to share our vision for the future with other people, and that is done through communication. I suppose when I think about the things that I have learnt in life is the importance to be self-reliant, to be able to depend on yourself and your own skills to be able to deliver what you need in your own life and to contribute towards delivering what is needed in the lives of those that we love. I've often heard people say, I would love to give, or I'd love to participate if only. You know, we could spend our lives being gunners, deciding that we would love to if only we could. The only thing that holds us back from being able to do things is ourselves, is the limits we place on ourselves. I also learnt that it was very important to be open to every opportunity. Those of you who may know a little of my background and have read, the number of involvements I have had would know that I've been involved as a representative of Australia in the APEC process. I've served on the Olympic Committee prior to the 2000 Olympics, and I've been a director of air services. What on earth did I know about air services other than turning up at an airport and boarding an aeroplane, sitting in a comfortable seat and flying to a destination? Yet somebody thought I had something that would be worthwhile to contribute on the board of Air Services Australia, so I was prepared to give it a go, as I did with APEC. Being one of the representatives of the 21 countries that make up the APEC Forum, I represented Australia for 6 years, and I found that a very enriching and enlightening experience. Enlightening in the fact that it takes forever for governments and for committees, and even committees representing governments, to get anything done. You sit and pontificate on all sorts of things that have very little relevance. Now, getting down to the crucial issues, and we're seeing that in Canberra today, spending our time reading about things of little relevance, that those who represent us are sitting in seats in Canberra doing next to nothing to improve our society. So it's important to understand the difference between wasting time just sitting around in conferences and pontificating and getting things done, being practical about life. You know, life is not complicated. We human beings tend to overcomplicate it. You know, communications between people should be very natural and very normal. You know, Wayne talked about, taking an interest in other people. That's one of the crucial, if we talk about secrets in success, it basically is one of the crucial realities that shouldn't be a secret. So few people take a genuine interest in the people they work with. We made that one of the basic principles of Nutrimetics. Every person who rose to management ranks in Nutrimetics was commissioned to know really what the goals were of everybody in their team. What brought them into the business? What is it they wanted to achieve? And the question always was, what can I do to help you succeed? It's a very simple question because we worked in teams and people were paid on their results. And if you were a member of my team, it wasn't a question of you having the impression I was ringing you and communicating with you to see what you were doing to help my goals. My role was to be in touch with you to understand what I could do to help you reach your goals. Because every major success in our business was made up of a myriad of smaller successes. And we needed every one of those smaller successes, and it was my role as a leader to ensure that I communicated with you to ask the question, what can I do to help you achieve your goals? And the guiding principles, I suppose, that guided me throughout my business life really came down to not intellectual intelligence, because I left school with an intermediate certificate, but I thoroughly believe that learning is a lifelong journey. And my journey over the years took me to be Chancellor of a university, a gal with an intermediate certificate, have never had any formal education. But we can do almost anything in life if we take up the advice that Wayne gave us just a few minutes ago. He talked about the Queensland State of Origin team, and it is to believe. And it is to believe that you can. You know, those two sayings, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. Because you put those limits on yourself. It's very important to believe in life that you can, and then give it a go. And don't turn back any reasonable opportunity to contribute to anything. I know very little about medicine, but in recent years, because I've had very close friends who've been struck with cancer, I've become very involved in cancer research, and together with a friend of mine have been able to influence the signing of an agreement between one of the major cancer research institutes in China with a group of our researchers here in Australia, researchers that had not been previously working together. There are all sorts of things in life that we can contribute to and make a meaningful difference. And talking about the things I learned that were the drivers in the business that Bill and I created in Australia, Nutrimetics. We learned from a very early stage of our lives that human beings respond very positively to positive reinforcement. We learn it as parents when we see our little children attempt to do something and we tell them what a good boy or a good girl they are and how clever they are and how we encourage them. And that's how they learn. They learn through our encouragement. We encourage them to keep trying to do things, not to stand back and not get up and try to walk when they're still crawling along. And by the way, don't get them walking too quickly because crawling is very important for coordination. But we encourage them to develop every talent they have as little children, and they respond very forcibly. And we find our children try to impress us constantly so that they can have more of that reinforcement, more of the compliments, more of the recognition. And you often notice in families, And it happens quite often with middle children. And our family was broken up into two parts of the family where there were the big girls. There were 3 of us who were born just a year apart, 13 months, 14 months between us. And then there was a 5-year break, and then the younger ones, my 2 younger sisters and my only brother, who was the baby of the family. And it's interesting, I'm now the grandmother of 13. I have 3 families of 3 and 1 family of 4. And I notice the characteristics of firstborn children, the youngest in the family, and also the middle children. And it's interesting, you know, the middle children have to somewhat strive harder for recognition because they're not the eldest and they're not the baby of the family. So they have to strive just that little bit harder, and they do try to have that recognition from their families. I was very fortunate as a very young child. I was kind of whipped out of that middle child position because my grandmother, when I was 2 years old, suggested to my parents that maybe they might like to have me stay with her because she was virtually on her own and she was nursing her eldest daughter who died of tuberculosis. And my parents, because they were living in one room and my mother had 2 other small children, she agreed. And I lived with my grandmother from the time I was 2 till I was 7, so I almost grew up in those very formative years as an only child. And I think that it was very important in the confidence I developed in myself and my grandmother encouraging me all the way to tell me that I could do anything that was within reason that I set my mind to do, that the only limitations I had were those that I placed upon myself. Even in grade 6, I actually earned a scholarship to go to senior high school, but my parents could only really afford to keep me at school until the age of 15 because my father needed somebody to work in the office of his local newspaper. It was a very fine newspaper but never made any money, and he couldn't afford to hire anybody. So when my elder sister left school to work in an accounting firm, and of course she married the principal of the accounting firm, my father then thought it was a good time for me to leave school and work with him, which I did for 2 years until I became thoroughly disenchanted with that because he wasn't paying me. So I thought it was time that somebody paid me for the time I invested in working. And I went to work for the Imperial Services Club in Barrack Street in the city as their wages clerk. And I had a variety of roles. Before I started in business with Bill, we built our own business, and the last 2 roles I had was with the National Cash Register Company as the trainer for operators that were going into newly established self-service stores. And then I went from there to become the manager of one of the first employment agencies in Sydney. And that probably gave me an insight into the things that employers need from their employees, and also to understand the goals and ambitions of those who were to be employed. And we established a culture in Nutrimetics that recognised the need for all our employees and all of those who worked as independent entrepreneurs associated with our business to achieve their goals in life. I'm very dry. Do you think I could have just a little water? Oh, thank you. And I also learned that different cultures aside, that I have learnt that people generally, no matter where in the world they come from, thank you very much. Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Yeah. Have remarkably similar motivations. We as human beings are motivated by much the same things in life. Very often, unless we're born with a silver spoon in our mouths, and very few of us are, we want to lead a better life than we saw our parents lead. That was certainly my goal. I wanted a better life than I saw my mother have to lead. And we also want to do better for our children. And we are usually proud of the nation into which we are born. And we are very, very embracing of those that we call true friends and our loved ones. So they're elements of all human beings around the world. During our years with Nutrimetics, we had better than or more than 250,000 independent entrepreneurs join our business around the world. And we recognised very early on how important it was to be supportive of each of those people, because the people who joined us as independent entrepreneurs were paid on their personal results. And to encourage them to literally fall in love with our product, because we had a feeling about teaching people how to sell, we needed to encourage them to have total faith in what it was that we were encouraging them to understand, to catch the vision that Bill and I had. And when women would come into our business and say, oh, look, I couldn't sell, I'm too shy, I couldn't sell. I'd say, are you ever shy about talking about your children? And of course the response is no. And the reason why you're not is because you know everything about them and you take pride in them. So it makes it easy for you to talk about them. We want you to develop that same feeling towards Nutrimetics product. And if you can't, if that doesn't happen for you, I'd much prefer that you go represent someone else. Go find a product in which you could have that feeling about. Because when you truly enjoy what you do and you truly believe in the value of the service or the product you are offering, you are far more successful as an individual and you're a far happier person. And you are far more effective, not only in life for yourself, but for those who you gather around you, who become part of your team. Because Nutrimetics was all part of teams and team building. Every single senior person in our business had a team of people. We were rather structured like an army unit. And of course, each of the units that made up, the major groups that we had were all composed of teams of one size or another. So the team leaders had to learn basically how to communicate with their people, to understand what their goals were, to know what they wanted to achieve. And that's really, the element that made Nutrimetics so successful. Nutrimetics became the largest skincare company in the country. And of course, it was the very element that took us to various other countries around the world. Bill and I recognised that it was important to establish a corporate culture that had people buy into the goals and ideals that we wanted to espouse. And of course, Bill and I had to learn to work with one another. Not only were we married and raising 4 children and spending our lives working together, each one of those individual occupations is a challenge, as many of you would know. But, when you combine all 3, that you're married to the person that you work with 7 days a week, and we did work 7 days a week, it's important to be able to divide the responsibilities. And Bill decided that I would be the better one to be the public face of the business, primarily because we were skincare, but if the truth were known, is because I was the one that could be shoved out front to talk about, joining the business, because neither one of us was an accomplished public speaker. Neither one of us had been trained in any of that, and somebody had to tell the story, had to be out front. So it was nominated that was me, and Bill managed everything behind the scenes. However, we both knew enough about one another's principal roles in the business to be able to take over and make decisions if Bill was overseas somewhere and I was back at base in Sydney, or vice versa. But we rarely, if ever, tried to overlap one another's decisions, because we felt that, that would be tantamount to all sorts of, mini crises. So we kind of respected one another's areas of responsibility. We also recognise that the importance in training the people who joined us, because really, in reality, I was really focused on turning our consultants into disciples, to have as much belief in the product that I had and as much belief in the value and benefit of those products as I had, because I recognised that that was the essential element to distinguish us from other companies that we were competitive with in the marketplace. We rarely, if ever compared ourselves to any other company. We focused on being who we were, and we focused on being the best, delivering the best service. And we looked for ways to give genuine recognition constantly. And we found that people responded very well to this constant recognition. Even the smallest achievement within a team was deserving of recognition. And when people rose to the level of our first management level and became eligible to drive a corporate car, we made a very big deal of this. Very often it was the very first, new car that had ever been in any of the families. And of course, we had struggled with many of the husbands of the women who represented us, because we were mainly women. We were 99.9% females selling the product. But very often, if we go back to 1969, late 60s, early 70s, very few men were excited about the thought of their wives going out to work in the evenings and leaving them to feed and bath the children and put them to bed. That wasn't his role. And we really had to then convince the guys that it was well worth them, accepting the fact that in doing that and assisting their wives to go out and put on a home presentation, that it would enhance the financial viability of the family. And of course, I was a little bit underhand. I used to gather groups of men to have, a one-on-one or a small group, with having men understand what it was we were endeavouring to achieve. And I would put the question to them, among many other things, what would be your greatest worry if anything happened to you and you couldn't provide for your family? And they would sort of sit there looking at me. And I would say, the fact that there was no money coming into the family, that your family would be in need. Wouldn't you feel comfortable or more comfortable if you knew that if you were for a period of time unable to provide for your family, your wife had a business that could be built around the domestic needs, that built around her principal role as homemaker, but could still develop a business that would provide for your family during a period of time when you could not? That would relieve your mind, wouldn't it? And as I'm looking at you and doing this, you're kind of agreeing with me. It's all very basic. And of course, I would tell him that we would make it possible for he and his wife to attend an international seminar every year at some exciting place around the world. But the important thing was that before she could qualify to go, she had to qualify for him to go. So we split our targets up into 2 periods of the year, and the first one was to qualify for the husband, and the second one was to qualify for herself. So guess what his attitude was once she qualified for him, because he couldn't go, she didn't. So, we had a great burst of energy in that second run through for the second qualification. And when she earned the right to drive a corporate car, and at one stage we had 600 cars in our fleet in Australia, when she earned that right to drive a corporate car, when we had the presentation of the car, it was a really big affair. And we had flowers for the bride, who was going to provide the car for the family, and we had a bottle of champagne for him and handed him the keys of the car. That was a very macho thing. So, we and he would stand up there. Very often the guys who had struggled most and argued most about their wives going out to do this, they would stand there and think, well, look what we've done, you know. You know, girls, you've got to learn to play the game, you know, in life. And I think, you know, we played it very well because we recognised the things that were important in Australian society. We also understood that it was so very important to keep sharing the vision with every new person who came into the business. And where possible and practical, to make the whole team feel like insiders, to hear and let them tell you of their ideas and their views, and then share with them the views and objectives of management. They will then all feel part of the decision-making process. And this is important for human beings to feel important, to feel as though they're a valuable part of the organisation, that they're making a meaningful contribution. It's also very important to be authentic. One of the lessons I learned very early in my life, and I can't recall where I heard this saying, but it had a great impression on me. Your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. You know, it's one thing to tell people how they should behave and what they should do, and it's quite another thing to follow that advice yourself. I heard a Canadian gentleman speak once at a seminar, and he talked, his whole subject was about not letting other people should on your life. And we all tend to should on other people's lives. We all seem to tell people what they should do, but it's a question of we deciding what we should be doing to contribute to other people's lives. And I've found that one of the best ways to teach any skill is the let me show you how method. You see, I've discovered it wasn't enough to have our representative sit in meetings and learn all about the product and all of the things that they should say. And one of the important things to remember is people don't care how much you know about what it is you're presenting until they know how much you care. And that's important, to let your own belief and your own authenticity shine through. You know, we had to probably change the format of some of our presentations because we found that many of our consultants were drowning their prospects in information that they didn't need to know. All the customer needed to know is, what is it going to do for me? And when you can share what it has done for you and your genuine belief, that's more impressive than all the other technical information. I also found that one of the best ways to teach a new skill, apart from the let me show you how, is to go over it a number of times and be patient. Patient up to a point, because I must tell you, I was never prepared to waste my time on people who were unresponsive. When you have given, you know, one individual as much as you would normally give to any one person, and they're not stepping up to the plate, well then I step back, because there is somebody else who needs that time and attention more and will be more responsive. So learn to make those decisions. Treat everybody identically when they come into your business. Give them as much of your care and concern and time, but don't waste your time if they're not responsive. And always remember that you must be patient in teaching new skills, because old habits are hard to break. You know, very often it's easier to take somebody who is an absolute rookie and give them the information straight off than to change somebody's modus operandi that they've been using for countless, months and years. One of the other things I also learned very early is, if the need arises to ever reprimand a co-worker, and I must impress this upon you, we never referred to anybody in Nutrimetics as working with or working for Bill or I. It was working with. I think it's fundamental for people to understand that when they go to work, they sell their time. They sell their services. They're basically working for themselves. And psychologically, that's very important, because when somebody is working for somebody else, they're only partially engaged. And it's like the principle of the person who's in business for themselves. No matter who you work for, you should be in business for yourself. You should be working for yourself with whomever you choose to work with. So as far as Bill and I are concerned, we were working and had people working with us. A better outcome is achieved and when we do have to reprimand a co-worker, a much better outcome is achieved when we preempt that critique with a positive reinforcement, because there's always something good you can say about somebody before you have to bring up something that is not up to scratch. And always criticise the decision or the action and not the person, because what you're dissatisfied with is what has come from the action of the person or the decision of the person. And always remember to praise in public and reprimand in private. That's very important. You never, ever place another human being in the way in front of people where they would lose face or lose their measure of self-esteem. This is very, very important. And you always adopt that approach if something is not done to your satisfaction, and it'll happen quite often. And if it's not, I usually use the term, if somebody hasn't quite measured up, I'll say, maybe I didn't explain things carefully enough. They'll get the message, but you're letting them off a little bit by taking the responsibility onto yourself. And you then follow up by saying, I'll be a little more careful in the way I give you, the instructions next time, so we'll both come out with a better result. And always remember that honey catches more flies than vinegar. It's really, that principle, that you keep building people up. You never, ever tear them down. And most importantly, never in front of anybody else. Another tip I'd like to share for those directly involved in sales, and one way or another, we're all engaged in sales most of our lives. We all sell ourselves to other people one way or another, be it to our parents, our siblings, our friends, our co-workers, whomever. We're all selling who we are and the benefits of being related or being associated with my goals in life. We found that the most effective way of making a sale was to take the emphasis off the sale. So we trained our Nutrimetics girls, not to think about making a sale, but to concentrate rather in creating the environment in which people want to buy. And they did that by offering their own personal experience and their own belief in the benefit and value of the product. If you don't know enough about your product to be really enthusiastic about it, well then either learn or go somewhere else. A very important part of training for Nutrimetics consultants was to ensure that our consultants were encouraged to share their personal experience with their products. I think I've already spoken about that. And if consultants did not develop that love of product, and I think I've already mentioned this to you, I would advise them to go represent somebody else. Go find something that you really enjoy doing and that you really want to be part of. You will be more successful, and the company that you leave will be more successful because you'll probably, make room for somebody else to come in who might be a little more enthusiastic than you were. Another very important piece of advice that I'm going to direct specifically at the women in the room, and particularly those that are career-focused and that are looking to work towards leadership within your company, is to do not even try to ever become a superwoman. It's impossible, girls. You will never live up to fulfilling everybody's expectations in every direction. And I would advise you to put yourself on an even footing with the boys and employ as much help as you can possibly afford, so that you can have as much time to concentrate on the things that are important in your life and the things that are important to your loved ones. And those things are not who washes and folds the socks and who washes the kitchen floor or cleans the oven. Those things are immaterial. They're only important if you expect somebody else in the family to do them. If you pay somebody outside, everybody's happy. And of course, it gives you an opportunity to look after your own sense of well-being and your own sense of value. And of course also, it spreads the wealth. When you employ somebody else to do the things that you prefer not to do because you have more important things to do with your time, it spreads the wealth and gives other people an opportunity to earn. So they're basically the things that we employed, the beliefs we employed in our business and the elements that made our business successful. And I'd have to say that if you take any of those things and employ them in your own business, and really principally to understand how much it is important to value everybody who works with you and to let them know it, your business will be far more successful. So thank you all for listening.